And thank you so much for watching Morning Live. Now, recent research has revealed how local journalists are overwhelmed, underpaid, and lack support in the workplace. And compiled by the Wits Journalism Project, the State of the Newsroom Report 2018 gives some insight into how media houses are struggling to keep afloat due to the current economic climate. And not only does this put more pressure on journalists, it also leads to countless job losses in the industry. And to discuss this further, we join now by Adjunct Professor Franz Krüger, who is head of Wits Journalism Department. Thanks so much for coming through.
Thanks, Akina. Great to be here.
Well, in this space, we tend to look forward to these reports just to give us, a sense of the latest trends in the newsroom. So what does this latest report reveal?
Well, I think it reveals a continuation of a trend that's been with us for some time. And it is, as you said in your introduction, that the economic pressures on the media houses is just dramatic. I mean, one of our contributors says that the number of jobs in journalism has halved in the last decade or so. And, there are reasons for that we can go into. But we've seen ongoing retrenchments across the board. Here at the SABC, of course, there's been discussion of retrenchments. I mean, so far that's been put on hold, but one doesn't know when that might come back. And certainly the other big media companies, are seeing job losses. TSO Blackstar is in the middle of a process to cut some more jobs. I just saw yesterday that earlier reports that the Sunday World was going to be closed seems now to have been staved off. They're able to sell it to somebody. One hopes that they can make a go of it. So the economic pressures are huge. And I think what we're seeing, though, is the growth of of journalism on the edges. Again, one of our contributors used the phrase that the industrial age of journalism seems to be ending. So you see a lot of activity in non-profit journalist ventures, the Amabunganis of the world, Health E, Bekisisa and others, who produce journalism and feed that into the big publishers, who don't seem anymore to be able to sustain the kind of work that needs to be done. So there's a lot more pressure on individual journalists. As you say, there's a lot of they're overwhelmed. There are pressures of a more direct kind that we also highlight. The trauma that's involved. It's a tough place to be at the moment.
It certainly is, and if you say it's a continuation of a trend that we've been seeing for a while now, it speaks to how the space is changing within journalism. But are journalists equipped to actually roll with the punches in that regard and make sure that they are able to adapt to this changing landscape?
Well, not enough, I think. One of our studies by Glenda Daniels looked at what journalists do if they do lose their jobs and they move into the gig economy. They do little bits of work here and there. They may get a contract to supply a feature a month or so to some publisher. They do a bit of PR. They do online work, where they can get it. And they're not getting the kind of institutional support either from their employers or even indeed from the unions that one would expect. People make that transition and there are new ventures and new things that are going, but as a field, it's very, very hard. And I think individual journalists are taking a lot of strain. And I think the point, Sakina, that needs to be emphasized is that it's not just about us as journalists having a hard time. It has real implications for the quality of our democracy, because the democracy needs solid, reliable, innovative journalism. It needs the kind of information to be made available so that people can make the kind of decisions that they need to make.
But again, does the space allow for that in the current climate? What does your report reveal?
Well, it reveals that it is under extensive pressure. I mean, I think one should be careful about doomsday scenarios. I think there is a definite decline in organized journalism in the kind of media, the sort of publishing industry, so to speak, journalistically. But it's not gone. And I think that it is more likely that it will take different forms than that it would disappear entirely. I mean, I don't think we can conceive of a society where there's no mechanism for people to be informed. But it is under severe pressure. And it is really unclear how things will turn out in the medium to long term.
So just looking at some of the pressures and the challenges that journalists face on a day-to-day basis in the newsroom, what does the report reveal in this regard?
Well, there are direct physical pressures. I mean, for threats that we've had. I mean, some political parties have been very aggressive, actually, in their treatment of some journalists. We've had that. We've had trends of online bullying, cyberbullying, particularly against women. Actually, women journalists have really been pressured in that way. Of course, there have also been circumstances where community protests have turned against the journalists who've come to cover them. We saw a little bit of that during the Fees Must Fall movement. We've seen it more recently. So there are those kinds of pressures, and I think one underestimates, and I think journalists underestimate the kind of trauma that is involved in some of that. I mean, I was back in the midst of time. I was involved at the SABC in overseeing the coverage of the Truth Commission, and the traumatic experiences that those journalists went through at the time were quite extraordinary, having to listen to the harrowing accounts that one is exposed to. I mean, that was a particular moment in our history, and it hasn't been repeated in that form. But it does speak to the kind of trauma that journalists have to endure. And then, of course, there is the worry about one's job, which is a very real one for a lot of journalists.
And speaking of the worry of jobs, why is it that media houses are finding it difficult to sustain themselves currently?
Well, it's because the way in which people consume news has changed so radically, or is changing so radically. I mean, it affects different media in different ways, but newspapers are particularly affected. People are getting their news online, they're Googling, they're going onto free websites, and they're getting their information there. And the organizations that are making money out of that shift are sitting in the US and elsewhere. So the Googles, the Facebooks, Amazon is less active in the space, but is also one of the big players. They're making huge amounts of money which previously ran into sustaining journalism. So we're seeing declining circulation because people are just not buying newspapers because they can get the information elsewhere. And that translates into shift in advertising spend, and that's going overseas. And so that's the reason why media houses, particularly those active in print, are struggling. I mean, the dynamic around the public broadcast is very different. I mean, it's not, it's related, of course, because, the SABC is also dependent on advertising income to a very large extent, but there is a much more complex set of more specific kind of dynamics at play here, which is affecting the SABC's ability to keep on going.
And we are out of time, but I just have to squeeze this question in about unions. We talk about job losses to journalists, but the unions are also losing their place in this industry. Talk to us about that and the effect that could potentially have.
Well, I mean, in past times, there used to be very strong journalists' union. One thinks of the SAUJ and Mwasa and others, which played an important role in defending journalists as employees, and those have pretty much disappeared. Mwasa is still there. SAUJ was closed down some years ago, and of course it means that journalists don't have that organized voice that supports them as employees. And South Africa is quite different to many other countries in that way, that for various reasons that are a bit hard to understand, we haven't managed to keep those unions going and doing what they need to do.
Which is interesting, but of course a conversation for another day. Sure. And thanks to Professor Franz Krüger, head of the Wits Journalism Department, talking to us about the latest state of the Newsroom Report. Some very interesting revelations coming out of there. We're going to take a break and then we'll bring you our regular Democracy Gauge feature, so stay with us.
Hey, Baba. You've been partying the whole night.
You complain a lot, man. If it's not the leaves, then it's the noise.
I've asked you so nicely before. Now I'm calling my lawyer.
Ooh, I am so scared. And like, where's your lawyer?
My lawyer is right here. Can't tell that.
Problems with the neighbors, rental disputes, advice on maintenance matters, drawing up a will. Clientele Legal will speak up for you. SMS DEFEND to 32281. We'll call you back.
Did you know the big hole digging started in 1871 and ended on the 14th August 1914? The hole produced 2,722 kgs of diamonds. However, one diamond as huge as 490 carat of stone found in the open prior 1868 gave them the interest to dig. Extracted from 22.5 million tons of soil. Today, the hole sits at a breathtaking 214 meters deep. Kimberley Big Hole attracts tourists from all over the world, taking a vintage tram past the city, then cycling around the Big Hole.
Sarah, who climbed Everest, she arrived here with much jubilation.
I took every African with me to the top of the world.
Most of the names on the wall are of soldiers who lost their lives in Somalia under the African Union Mission in Somalia, AMISOM.
In Africa, we have Ubuntu.
We need to make more integration.
The highlight of the Zigama is the highest bungee jump in the world.
The main driver of that area is tourism.